Hey guys. This is part 3 of What If Naruto Became Hidan. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 10, Part 1, Chapter 9. Alright brats, let's get going already. Naruto futilely insisted for what felt like the millionth time today. Literally, he was already standing several feet away from them, having tried to leave, repeatedly, only to get caught up in some stilted conversation and then yet another mushy round of bye-byes and I'll miss yous, repeatedly, much to his seemingly eternal annoyance. Why couldn't they say their farewells, once mind you, and get on with the actual leaving part already? Next thing he knew, he'd have to suffer through some sort of formal goodbye party and corresponding dinner reception, and knowing the nature of his luck, that was a very real possibility. Because for Jashin's fucking sake, the last thing Naruto wanted to do was spend any more time in the bloody dry as fuck desert. Goodbye, I'll miss you all. Sashimi called from beside her newly purchased set of bodyguard ninja, Ebi something, as they all stood beneath the carved gates of Sunagakure together. The blonde woman smiled beatifically, all teary-eyed and snotty, as she repeated the same line she'd saw about 8 times prior to this already, just one more time. And I'll never forget what you've done for me. Thank you, don't mention it, Sashimi. Bye-bye. Yukio exclaimed happily while waving his arms back and forth like a strange human windmill hybrid. The wide grin plastered all over his round dimpled face left Naruto with the almost, we're stressing the word almost to its literal breaking point here, irresistible urge to drown his pupil in a pool of his own blood. Goodbye, Miss Sashimi, and good luck. Emi cried back, her own snot and tears running down her face unattractively as she too waved her goodbye as though she were trying to fling her own arms off of her body by force alone. Again, Naruto's first instinct was to help her speed the process along by just tearing the offending appendages off himself. At least Nanashur had the sense, survival instincts, to keep it sweet, short and simple, Naruto thought. Then again, the redhead was pretty emo and a prodigy to boot, so it was probably just the default setting doing its job. Either way, it meant Naruto only had to physically pry 2 of his students away from their former clients so they could get on with it all and go the hell home. Yeah, whatever, we'll miss you so much, lots of hugs and kisses and, let's go already. Naruto bellowed, having lost what little bit of patience he'd initially possessed a long time ago. You've been saying goodbye for 20 freaking minutes now, he exclaimed, exasperated. Alright, sorry Sensei, Emi said, having wiped her marred face, now looking sheepish, having finally realized that they'd long since left the teary goodbye zone and descended into this is fucking ridiculous land. Alright, let's move, Naruto said, practically dragging Yukio and Emi through the sand as he tore off in the general direction of Yugakure, all the while ignoring the tentative looks he was receiving from all 3 of his students when they thought he wasn't looking. Since the death of the Miss Swordsman woman bitch, and the subsequent revelation of his inability to die like a normal human being, Naruto had noticed his genin walking on eggshells around him, well, more than usual anyway. He could practically see the questions and insecurities swirling about their pretty little heads. Not even 10 minutes into the journey back to the land of hot water, Naruto decided that he could not take another day or so of this before they got to Yugakure, or, sage forbid, if they actually kept up the mouse act even after they got home. So Naruto stopped running over the sand and did what he always did. He didn't bother tiptoeing around the subject, and instead spat out exactly what he needed to say and the 12-year-olds needed to hear. Just ask already, for fuck's sake. Your curiosity is driving me crazy, he groused, making all 3 of his students, who'd each been running in front of him, jump at the suddenness of the remark. Or so he told himself. How? Yukio hesitantly asked. Listen kid, even I don't know how. Next question. And it was true. How Hidan had originally gained his immortality was just one of the many memories Naruto had not inherited from the original Jashin worshipping nut just quite yet. Sure, over the last few years he'd gained some serious insight. A fair bit he didn't want any part of, mind you, into the history and thought processes of Hidan, but even Kurama was still stumped about how his immortality had come about. Eventually, after debating for hours without coming up with anything plausible that didn't involve leprechauns, the 2 had just decided to leave it as it was. In any case, it's not like they could do anything practical about it right now. What would you call it? Is it a healing factor, a Kekkei Genkai? Nanashur asked, seeming intrigued, though Naruto hoped it wasn't for the wrong reasons, like a few probably gay pedophile snake bastards Naruto could name. No bloodline limit, it's just me, Naruto replied, and I just call it immortality. Do you know how to die? Yukio asked. Nope, though I think starving might do the trick, Naruto said before thinking about some of the more creative ways Hidan had carked it in the past, that he could remember at least, and concluding that, maybe. I don't know, nothing else has worked. He finally shrugged. Okay, what about age? Do you age? Emi inquired. No. How old are you then? No clue. Naruto shrugged. My memories get more fucked up the further back I go, though I can confidently say I've been around for at least the last 200 years. Maybe. The furthest back I've been able to accurately date was that one time I got really drunk and attacked a Bon festival with a chihuahua and a candle holder. He shrugged. It was tricky trying to be as truthful as possible while answering such delicate questions, especially with only a few partial memories to go by. 200? Cool. My sensei is invincible and as old as dirt. Yukio cheered, jumping up and down in his excitement, and while Naruto thought that it was cool that he just become Yukio's idol and all, he knew he had to disillusion the kid or run into trouble later. What the hell are you on and where can I get some? Naruto snorted. I'm not invincible. I can still be trapped and incapacitated. Once I lose my head, I'm practically useless until it comes back into contact with my body to heal. Yukio seemed to visibly deflate at this, however Nanushir and Emi both only looked thoughtful at this information. You did say that if you'd been decapitated it would have been worse. Nanushir muttered. Wait! Emi cried, looking scandalized as she spoke. You call Yukage-sama an old man all of the time. And it isn't even accurate. Course I do. Naruto shrugged as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Unlike me, he looks and acts old, so he is old. Me on the other hand, I'm ageless. Besides, once I act even a little mature, everyone expects me to always be mature, and there is no way in hell I'm turning into an emo with a stick up my ass or a senile scatterbrain. No offense, red bandana boy. Hidan added. What do you mean, no offense? Yukio exclaimed. Are you implying that I'm a girl? And speaking of whiny little shits, I still can't believe that whinge little bastard ran away on me. Naruto moaned, thus interrupting Yukio's indignant response as he once again started moving, though at a slower pace than before, through the desert, having finally left all of that figuratively dangerous conversational territory behind them. The look on Nanushir and Yukio's faces when they finally interpreted the second veiled insult was just an added bonus. I can. Emi muttered, glancing up at Naruto for a moment before, just as quickly, looking back down at the endless sand they were traversing over. Naruto managed to shoot the girl one final glance before Yukio opened his big mouth again and the fireworks began. He took those wicked swords too. Yukio whined miserably, read pathetically, I wish I could have kept them, they were awesome, HN. Yes, everything was going to be just fine. Just fine. They'd finally left the desert behind them some time ago, and Yukio was sure he'd never been so happy to see trees. Jumping from branch to branch, Yukio let his mind wander for once. Hey, do you think we'll ever see her again? Yukio asked, trying to think of a plausible situation in which meeting the pretty heiress could one day arise. Who? Hidan asked, looking genuinely confused, which kind of worried Yukio a bit. Sashimi? Yeah, you're not making any sense, kid. Hidan deadpan, making Yukio very worried. Sashimi Shirono, the woman we just spent several days traveling with. We all nearly died to save her life. If you weren't, whatever you are, you would have died for her. We saw her only, like, a day ago. Emi exclaimed. Oh, her. Hidan smiled as though he'd suddenly had some great revelation. Sorry, she was pretty forgettable. He shrugged, making Yukio think that maybe his sensei was senile after all, regardless of how very young he looked. Forgettable? Nanushir queried. Yeah, it happens a lot. You meet someone, have a real heart-to-heart, and live through some horrible experience with them, and then BM. As soon as they're out of your direct line of sight, you never mention them again. Hidan explained while scratching the back of his head thoughtfully. Why? Yukio asked, genuinely confused by his sensei's logic. Unknown. Just another one of those great mysteries of life, I guess. Finally, after days of traveling and listening to Hidan either bitch about the hidden misjutsu or mutter under his breath about something called a Sarenjin or something, Team Kickass, as Hidan had officially dubbed them upon completing their first real mission, had finally made it back home to Yugakure. Emi was sure the large torii gates had never seemed so inviting, especially after so long without a decent shower or a good night's sleep in the proper bed she knew awaited her at home. Hey guys, before we go in, can I ask something of you? Hidan asked them quietly, breaking Emi from her thoughts just as effectively as if he'd yelled, since Hidan's tone suddenly seemed to be so hesitant, which rang strange and just wrong on a lot of levels to Emi. Sure, sensei, the 12-year-old replied in a stutter, unsure of how to deal with the situation she found herself in. Ever since witnessing the ending scene of Enichi Zaraki's final struggle against her sensei, her immortal sensei, Emi had felt uneasy in his presence. Knowing her sensei wasn't quite right in the head was one thing after all, but seeing it, well, let's just say it was a real eye-opening experience, because no matter how nice he tried to appear on the surface, Emi knew that Hidan was anything but. Sure, Emi realized there had to be something deep down in Hidan that wasn't tainted by his 200 or more years of endless life. There was no telling what he'd seen and done, for good, bad, or far worse, but until she really saw it, the 12-year-old was resolved to be cautious. That is, she was until she noticed Hidan standing in between them and Yugakure looking like he was having an internal battle of sorts. His silver brow was furrowed and his arms were crossed over his well-formed chest, his shoulders tense as he took a deep breath in and let it out again in a heavy sigh. "Listen guys, I need you to keep quiet about the whole immortality thing," Hidan said after a moment of deep deliberation. It seemed to Emi though his tone had yet to change from that tentative quiet back to his normal cheery demeanor, or even his more insane persona. At this point, Emi wasn't sure if she didn't miss her sensei's more unstable tendencies, if only because they were more familiar and not like this. "Can you do that?" he asked quietly. "Of course, Hidan sensei." Emi cheered, trying to bring Hidan's mood up and back to normal if only so he wouldn't be so nervous anymore. Within the confines of her mind, Emi confessed to herself that this hesitant, unsure Hidan was indeed a part of that more vulnerable side she'd been wanting to see in him for the last few days, if only for her own reassurance. However, Emi didn't count on finding this soft side scarier than the one covered in blood and grinning like a loon. Nervous did not suit him, she decided then and there, not one bit. "Sure thing," Yukio agreed with her, his expression just as forcibly cheerful, which probably meant he agreed. "Yes," Nanushir said, shuffling his feet as he spoke. The fact that he bothered to articulate was on its own a testament to the redhead's discomfort. Emi knew. "Good," Hidan said, his posture visibly relaxing before that familiar closed-eyed goofy grin broke out across his, literally, youthful face. "Otherwise I'd have to skin you all alive with a rusty kunai and leave you tied to an anthill, made of lava, while you're on fire," Hidan told them all a little too cheerily. "Oh, okay then," Emi stuttered, wondering whether he was serious or not. She liked to think he wasn't, but with Hidan, well, you just never knew. "Come on, let's go. We need to report to old man Kamizuki soon." Hidan smiled before turning on his heel and striding across the space remaining between him and the front gates as if nothing had ever happened. For a moment, Emi envied his ability to ignore anything and everything if he so chose. If she could, the young genin knew she'd erase more than the last few minutes from her recollections. "Hey guys, welcome back from your first C rank," one of the chunin guarding the gates called out to them with a wide grin on his freckled face once Emi and the others had managed to catch up to their sensei and begin approaching Yugakure again. "Actually it was an A rank," Yukio spoke up, correcting the chunin with an uncharacteristically serious expression on his usually carefree face. Emi found herself nodding somberly in agreement. She wished it had only been a C rank. She really did. "Haha. Yeah, whatever kid." The second chunin laughed. "Actually it was." Nanushir broke in. "We ran into Enichi Zaraki and her apprentice. They were hired by an enemy faction to kill our client." "Why, you're serious?" the first chunin exclaimed. "Shit, how are you alive?" the second asked, posing the question to Hidan this time instead of Emi or the others. Please, she was annoying, but she wasn't that bad. Emi's sensei shrugged in true Hidan fashion. "The shinobi swordsmen are all the fucking same though, I swear. It's mist jutsu this and water jutsu that. Even their rants are the same." The jonin complained almost childishly. "Oh okay sensei, we get it." Emi interrupted him in hopes of staving off another one of Hidan's rants. Once he got going, he was usually very passionate about his dislikes, the 7 shinobi swordsmen apparently being chief among them. "It's over and done with, and who knows, maybe you won't have to deal with another swordsman again. What are the odds if you've already met so many of them before?" Emi asked. "Emi's right though, I think you made that Mao guy piss himself when you started listing why you hated them all. He's probably scarred for life." Yukio laughed yet again, though Emi silently agreed. Hidan had been rather brutal when he took his irritation at being stabbed so much out on the poor shinobi, and yes, after seeing her sensei literally toss the man about like a rag doll, Emi felt no discomfort or guilt for sympathizing with her enemy. "Pfft, you guys are overreacting. I'm not that bad." Hidan smiled, however. That smile slowly waned when his eyes set on something in the distance, thus forcing Emi and her team to turn around and finally notice a man approaching them. The man had ash-white hair and dark green eyes that seemed to stand out even more against his paler skin. He was in his late 40s and wore elegant silver and blue robes with a light gray haori over the top. His expression was grim and his eyes were emotionless, dead. All in all, his whole being from his stiff posture to his icy demeanor, and his expensive clothes just screamed noble, with capitals and everything, Nanisher. The man addressed the red-headed boy standing a little in front of Emmy neutrally, not even bothering to nod his head or wave in greeting. Father. Nanisher intoned in a similar fashion, though the fact that the man was Nanashi's father was a shock. Between the two, the only resemblance Emmy could physically see between them was Nanashi's green eyes and the shape of his nose. Everything else from his rounder face to his bright red hair was foreign when compared to the man's, Nanashi's father's, albino hair and his more angular aristocratic features. I trust you have returned from your mission with success, Nanashi's father said, his voice even and dispassionate, which alarmed Emmy. Was Nanashi's dad really this cold, or was it a front? Yes, father. Anything less would be unacceptable for a shinobi of the Shiro line. Nanashi's father intoned with a slight nod of his head, which led Emmy to believe that yes, Nanashi's dad was in fact this cold. Like an icy blizzard, actually. Yes, father. Nanisher replied evenly, never once making eye contact or moving a muscle as he spoke. Right, can I cut in here? Hidan asked, which kind of pulled Emmy back to planet Earth given how suddenly he'd spoken up. Emmy herself wasn't game enough to speak up given the icy looks she and Yukio periodically received from Nanashi's father. However, those chilling glances were nothing compared to the frozen glares of death Hidan was given. I'm guessing you're Red's dad and all, but I thought you'd be a little more concerned given our mission got bumped up to A rank. Unless you weren't just eavesdropping on us talking to these fine chunins here like I thought you were. Hidan added sarcastically. However, Nanashi's dad didn't move a muscle at the jab. He merely glared at Hidan a moment longer before turning his attention back to Nanisher, who had still yet to raise his gaze from that random object he currently had his eyes locked on, i.e. the ground. Even the chunin guards looked highly uncomfortable as Nanashi's father began to speak in that same toneless drawl. You will continue to accomplish your missions at a satisfactory level. You will need to be exemplary to complete the task the elders have given you. Anything less would be unacceptable for a shinobi of the Shiro line. The man lectured his son. Yes, father. Do not let this commoner hold you back. Nanashi's father sneered while gesturing to Hidan, not even bothering to look at him this time. Emmy simply stared at the man, flabbergasted as he continued to speak. I am already in negotiations with the council and the Yuckage to have you trained under a proper sensei of respectable birth, unlike this outsider. Once the Yuckage agrees, you shall be given a proper tutor. Anything less would be unacceptable for a shinobi of the Shiro line. Yes, father. The Shiro clan heir didn't even bother saying goodbye to his son or any such thing. The man simply turned on his heel and strode away without a glance backwards, his long bone-white hair swaying behind him as he walked. Red, Hidan spoke up, his eyes locked on Nanashi's father's retreating back. Emmy herself was still staring at Nanisher, who had yet to look up. Not even Yukio was ignorant or dumb enough to comment at this point, though it appeared Hidan was. I don't know if you've realized this yet, but your dad is a prick, Hidan told him. I know, Nanisher replied, like an even bigger prick than me, and I pride myself on being the biggest prick to others that I can be, Hidan said, making Nanashi's lips twitch slightly at the comment Emmy saw. It's actually a pretty hefty accomplishment, and I'm torn on whether to loathe or admire him for it, Hidan finished, looking almost thoughtful as he spoke, earning a full-blown laugh from Yukio and a tiny tentative smile from Nanisher, who only just now raised his head to look up at their sensei. I know. He smiled slightly. Is he really going to make you change teams? Emmy asked Nanisher, catching his attention and instantly wiping any trace of that smile off of his face again, much to Emmy's silent disappointment. No, he can't, Hidan answered confidently for Nanisher. The council can't do it without old man Kamizuki's approval, and he won't approve. You're good on that front, Red. How do you know Yuckage-sama won't agree? Nanisher asked. He likes me. You're lying again. The Yuckage hates you, Hidan-sensei, Yukio exclaimed, pointing an accusing finger up at the silver-haired man, much to the amusement of the snickering chunin guards. Emmy noted. Yeah, he always ends up yelling at you and throwing us out of his office. Sometimes he hurls projectiles at your head and your man parts, Emmy pointed out, deciding to put her own 2 cents into the conversation. He has threatened to murder you in cold blood while you sleep 762 times in the last 3 weeks alone. Nanisher nodded in agreement with Emmy and Yukio before adding, and that doesn't include the castration threats if you ever reproduce. Wait, you counted? Yukio asked, blinking olishly at the redhead in confusion. HN. was Nanashi's only reply, having returned back to his default responses, i.e. grunting. Listen, I don't know what you're all making such a big deal about, but I'm pretty sure old man Kamizuki likes me, so he won't change the teams. Hidan said, looking relaxed and carefree as he began to walk through the gates towards the administration building in the center of Yukikure. Emi noticed that, like her, neither Yukio nor Nanashir made a move to follow him, instead gazing at the man's retreating back in deep thought. Looks like you'll have a new sensei by the end of the week, bastard. Yukio remarked brightly before finally making a move to follow their sensei at his own pace. Emi herself had to come to a similar conclusion and placed a gentle, comforting hand on Nanashi's shoulder, smiling sadly as she said a quiet, "I'll miss you, Nanashir." With that said, the two trailed on after their other teammate and their wayward sensei, Nanashir letting out a tired sigh and a quiet HN in response. Dashing through the streets of Yugakure at top speed, Naruto made it to the main administration building in but a few minutes and decided to wait for his students. However, they seemed to like taking their sweet time in getting there, leaving Naruto alone with nothing to do while he waited. Shrugging, Naruto channeled chakra to his feet and started to walk up the side of the multiple-story structure towards the Yukage's office at a leisurely pace. By the time Hidan had located the window he wanted and noticed it was open, Naruto could hear his students panting and gasping for air from inside, probably having started to rush once they hadn't seen Naruto waiting for them outside the admin building. Grinning at how things had turned out, Naruto gripped the edge of the windowsill and easily maneuvered his lanky body up until he was seated comfortably on the windowsill with his legs propped up and his arms crossed over his chest. He made sure to shift any and all remaining sand on his person onto Kamizuki's floor with a small burst of wind. Chakra while he was there, sadly, he'd already come to the definitive conclusion on his way back from Suna that his magnet release affinity did not under any circumstances extend to the manipulation of sand, which sucked balls because Gaara was just plain epic with it. "What's wrong, Hidan?" Old man Kamizuki's voice echoed sarcastically around the room, having no doubt noticed Naruto long before he entered through the window. Then again, Naruto hadn't been trying to hide his presence, and the man was a Kage. "Too good to slam my doors obnoxiously anymore?" The Yukage asked from his usual position sitting at his desk. In front of the old man were Emi, Yukio and Nanashir, all having finally managed to calm their breathing as the Yukage spoke. Grinning at them with a wink, Naruto casually rose from his perch on the windowsill and walked around the Yukage's desk, sitting on the edge of the wooden table with his arms still folded over his chest. However, to sit, Naruto had had to shuffle one of the many stacks of paperwork littering the man's desk a little to the left, earning him a glare that no doubt was meant to kill. "It's amazing lasers aren't shooting from his eyeballs," Kurama remarked amusedly from within the confines of Naruto's mind. Not just figured coming in through the window made for a cooler entrance. It was more convenient than the door in any case. Naruto shrugged with a grin. "You're kidding me, right? It's a window." Kamizuki groused sourly, eyeing Naruto for a moment longer before looking down again to sign another document and sit it on one of the shorter piles in front of him. "I could enter via the walls if you wanted. Actually, that is a way better idea. Thanks, old man Kamizuki." Naruto smiled happily, feeling pretty good about himself, when Kamizuki's head snapped up with his eyes narrowed and his glare intensified, the man radiating real honest-to-God killing intent in hostile little waves. "Hidan, you touch my walls and I will break you, so I can still call you an old man?" Naruto asked eagerly, easily ignoring the rapidly rising killing intent that no doubt was near crushing to his students by this point. "Wow, thanks, old man Kamizuki. Hidan, please." Kamizuki sighed after a moment, having dropped the glare and the killing intent for a tired expression and pleading. "If you even like me, just a little bit, please, don't call me old man Kamizuki." Naruto stared at the man's weathered face, his weary eyes and the bags beneath them. The pleading tone and the desperate look on the man's expression were about all Naruto could take, even with the usually more sadistic aspects of his personality. "Okay." He finally caved with a pout on his face. Stony silence met his easy acceptance of Kamizuki's request. Even Naruto's students were too shell-shocked to comment. "Oh, okay?" Kamizuki stuttered, sounding so unsure of how to deal with this, looking for the first time to be a little out of his depth. Secretly, Naruto thought it was pretty damn funny, as did Kurama. "Yes, okay." Naruto nodded slowly, as though talking to a toddler. "Are you alright though? You look a little pale." "Yes, just state your mission report and get out, please." Kamizuki frowned, looking a good 10 years older than he did only a few moments ago. Naruto could remember his own old man Hokage having that very same expression on his face at some point in time whenever he came into contact with a younger Naruto for more than a few minutes, especially after he'd eaten sugar, or ramen, or anything really. It was very nostalgic actually, if you say so. Naruto shrugged though when he simply stood there, waiting for the metaphorical dam to burst. He was not disappointed when old man Kamizuki finally lost any and all patience. Your mission, Hidan? The aging Yukage prompted. Oh, right. Well, we were escorting Sesame or whatever her name was, Sashimi. Kamizuki interjected with narrowed ocean blue eyes. When out of nowhere some stupid Miss Swordsman asshole with no sense of originality whatsoever jumped out, and quite inconsiderately impaled me on a sword. I got up. You got up. The Yukage muttered only to be ignored by Naruto, who decided to just keep talking as though he hadn't said a word. Beat the living shit out of him, and it turns out he isn't even a Miss Swordsman asshole. No, he's just a Miss Ninja asshole. Anyway, before I could kill him, some other Miss Swordsman woman bitch who was actually a swordsman faked the just a Miss Ninja asshole's death and ran off with him. That part was all Girly's fault. Anyway, once the just a Miss Ninja asshole and the Miss Swordsman woman bitch had pissed off, I cornered Salome, and we found out that you sent us on an A-rank mission. A-rank? Me? Kamizuki exclaimed, his expression now shocked and confused. And being the upstanding person I am. Ha, yeah right. Yukio snorted at this, however Naruto just as easily ignored him too, continuing on to say, I agreed that we should continue on with the mission, regardless of the danger. Bandana Boy wanted to go home, his exact words being fuck the bitch, I'm sure. The Yukage finally drawled, but luckily he was outvoted. We carried on with our journey until we ran into the just a Miss Ninja asshole and the Miss Swordsman woman bitch again in the desert. We duked it out in a battle of epic proportions during which I, once again, was forced to withstand a complete lack of originality in the form of stupid speeches, some low-grade boring water jutsu that they somehow managed to pull off in the middle of the land of wind, and that moronic fucking mist jutsu which they also tried to use while standing dead center in the fucking desert. God, I hate that thing so much dash, no kidding. Yukio muttered to himself in the background, though Naruto still heard him perfectly, and then proceeded to ignore him perfectly too. Anyway, so we fought, blah blah blah, and then the Miss Swordsman woman bitch practically gets herself killed so the just a Miss Ninja asshole can ditch to who knows where to live happily ever after. So we went on our way through the hot as fuck desert and left Salami there somewhere. After that we came back here, met Red's asswad of a sperm donor, and I made an awesome entrance via the window only to get dissed for it. I mean, here I am trying to make your day more entertaining and all I get is bullshit. No appreciation whatsoever. Naruto grumbled petulantly, his arms crossed over his chest as he pouted at the floor. Your mission reports are as amusing as ever, Hidan. Kamizuki stated dryly after waiting a second to make sure Naruto was done, as he always did when Naruto came in to report, well, on just about anything. However, one thing does bother me. Exactly who are your opponents? I believe you creatively nicknamed them the Just a Miss Ninja hole and the Miss Swordsman woman. B***tch? Don't know, can't remember their actual names now. They were pretty insignificant. Naruto shrugged, earning himself an exasperated sigh from the old Kage and a trio of amused glances from his genin. Though, the Miss Swordsman woman bitch was one of those swordsmen of the mist, and the other guy was her apprentice. Naruto then began pulling at the spare cloak he had on, searching for a small storage scroll about the size of his hand. I've got the bitch's head in here somewhere. He muttered before chiming, ah, there it is. Naruto then made a show of presenting the little scroll to the old man, though he made sure not to unseal it given the pasty looks he'd received from his students when he collected the head in the first place, let alone what Kamizuki's reaction would be should a bloody severed head appear on top of his paperwork. While on a normal day, Naruto would pay to see something like that, something, Kurama**, told him that the aging Kage probably wouldn't handle it too well right now. You ran into one of the 7 swordsmen and her apprentice on a C rank? Kamizuki muttered, staring at the scroll now sitting innocently on his desk with no little apprehension, still trying in vain to process the information. Actually, it was more like an A rank. I already told you, Naruto said flippantly, a C rank escort mission. With a genin team. Kamizuki clarified, still looking very uncomfortable and not at all like he was dealing well with this newfound knowledge. Probably good Naruto didn't get the head out then. Yes, I just said that. Naruto nodded before adding, and of course with my genin team, who else would I take? Certainly not Sakami or whatever her name was. She was hopeless. Okay. I'm just going to ignore the added comments and take a bit of time to process this. You can go now, but I'll want a written report, without demonstrational and educational illustrations, on my desk by tomorrow. Kamizuki said before muttering to himself, first you actually listened to me and now this. At this, Naruto only grinned before turning around and beginning to usher his students out the door, though after glancing back at the aging Kage, it became apparent that Kamizuki looked more than a little pale, so Naruto decided that he'd forego his usual rigorous farewell routine for the old man's sake. However, Naruto also decided that the old man had enough color in his skin left for one last little jab. "Alright, see ya later, old man Zuki," Naruto called out as he slammed the door shut behind him, faintly hearing the snickers of several ANBU hidden around and inside the office as he did so. "Nuh!" The pained scream echoed throughout the building from behind the closed door and left Naruto chuckling at the Kage's misfortune, which on second thoughts probably wasn't a very good thing to do. "Sensei," Yukio began to speak, instantly gaining Naruto's attention given the hesitant tone the preteen used. "I don't know if anyone's ever told you this, but you're evil." "What kind of evil?" Naruto asked, genuinely curious now. "The pure unadulterated kind, or the kind you find on the back of cereal boxes getting his face punched in by a guy in spandex? The kind where even the most soulless, asshole-ish and monstrous of villains seem more like overgrown academy students compared to your Kage-level evil?" "With a capital letter," Yukio replied. "That's pretty evil." Emi noted. Well then yes I am." Naruto grinned before adding on as an afterthought, "This brings me to my next point, training." "Training? What does that have to do with evil?" Yukio asked, though all three looked a little worried about his answer. From within Naruto's mind, he could hear Kurama cackling at what Naruto had planned for his victory. Students. "Yes, students, a lot," Naruto replied with a vicious grin stretching across his face. "And before you ask, yes, you need training because you were pitiful on that last mission." "I thought that would have been obvious." "You mean our first E rank, the one that got bumped up to A rank?" Emi queried. "Yes." Naruto nodded. "So, to counteract how pathetic you all are, I'm going to be training you all until your limbs just about drop off. Up to this point I've been nice, but now I'm going to pull all of the stops and become your worst nightmare." Naruto grinned sadistically, probably appearing all the scarier and insane to his Victi students than usual, somehow. "Prepare kiddies, prepare for hell." Kamizuki Shiger watched as the three genin followed their sensei out of the main administration building from the large window Hidan had entered his office through only minutes before. Smiling, the graying Yukage fondly considered that amusing sight that had become so familiar to him in the last few months. Even if it looked like the silver-haired man was threatening those poor children with something especially gruesome, if the way they all appeared to be near tears was anything to go by. Shaking his head as young Yukio ran away from Hidan screaming his lungs out, only to be followed closely by little Emi, and the son of the current Shiro clan heir, Kamizuki hoped to the gods above that everything went as he prayed it would. After all, the Chunin exams were only a few months away, and from then on, the Yukage knew from his own sources around the village that life in Yugakure would be all the more unstable, especially for Hidan and those like him. The Outsiders, Chapter 11, Part 1, Chapter 10. "So this is the Hidden Leaf Village," Yukio muttered, gazing at his surroundings with interest and an uncertain sense of ill ease. Unlike the dense stone structures that surrounded Yugakure or the bright red torii gates leading to his home village, Konohagakure was safely enclosed within impossibly tall wooden walls with carefully carved wide-open gates and vast forests lining its boundaries. A little deeper than differences in appearance, though, was the knowledge that, on some level to Yukio anyway, Yugakure was pretty nice for a village run by shinobi, especially when one compared it to what he'd heard about Kirigakure and Iwadakure. This place, however, well, it took the proverbial cake. Because no matter where he looked, Yukio was surrounded by smiling faces and pretty stores and flowers. It made the dark-eyed boy wonder how this place could be a ninja village, what with every person he walked past, whether they be shinobi or civilian, practically farting rainbows with how cheery and wholesome they all were. Beyond that, the village's more prominent physical features were both the large stone face that had, for some strange reason, been carved into the side of the mountain lining the northern side of the village, and the wide red and white cylindrical building below it that towered over the surrounding architecture. Yukio guessed that this was the Hokage's office, since it was in the center of the village and thus visible from just about everywhere, with a large kanji for fire printed on the front of it in bold lettering. Team Kickass had only arrived in Konohagakure just under an hour ago and had been subjected to every known, and some decidedly unknown, form of privacy invading inspection. Then they were sent on their way. At least once everyone thankfully had their clothes back on anyway, with a few somewhat vague directions through the heart of the village to their hotel. Despite the awkward searches, odd positions, and just nakedness of the past hour or so, Yukio knew he should be beyond ecstatic to be in such a new and exciting place, especially without the threat of A-rank Miss Neen popping out of the woodworks to try and kill him and his team. And he had been, before Hidan had happened. You see, when he first learnt that the Chunin exams were in the Hidden Leaf and that he would be in attendance, Yukio had understandably been as excited as he should have been when he first became a genin. Those initial meetings with Hidan and the whole genin test / almost getting murdered by Hidan thing sadly kind of put a damper on his overall enthusiasm. Emmy meanwhile had practically started dancing at the chance to be a Chunin, and while Nanashir had seemed a bit sour, for some reason, he'd at least been gracious about it and grunted, in what everyone situated in the Yukige's office at the time thought was agreement, when asked if he would go. It was Hidan's reaction that had just about everyone confused. It's also what had Yukio feeling tired and in pain and tired and sick and tired and just about every other negative emotion and or physical sensation he could possibly think of right now. It all started when Team Kickass returned back victorious from Wind Country and learned they would have to travel to and stay in the Hidden Leaf Village if they wanted to take part in the exams in the coming months. It wasn't immediate, but eventually after learning all of this, Hidan had, for some reason or another, transformed from his usual pleasant enough guy turned nightmare psycho at any moment into an upfront nightmare psycho to deal with. The man had been grumpy, he had been difficult, and he wouldn't stop muttering about how something called Jashin hated him with the burning passion of 1,000 suns. Hell, even the Yukich himself had resolved to stay the hell away from the unstable Jonin for at least a few days, or weeks, or months, so said ass backward insane shinobi could cool down or something. Sadly, Yukio and his fellow genin were not so lucky as to have that option available to them. Several months ago, when Hidan said he would be upping their training, he hadn't been joking, or overestimating his own affinity for torture. Because that is what Hidan had subjected all three of them to, their own personal brands of hell, and that was putting it lightly. However, the last month or so since their sensei's mood had soured had been worse again, somehow. Hidan had quite literally trained them into the ground, to the point that they couldn't even, quite literally, crawl away. So while Yukio knew they had definitely benefited from the training, it sadly didn't make it any less a traumatizing experience. Yes, it's lovely, isn't it? Hidan grouched, his arms folded over his chest with his facial features hidden behind the zipped-up high collar of his cloak and the conical straw hat he wore with small ornamental torques and tassels hanging down over his face as he stomped down the street. From behind him, Yukio eyed the long silver ponytail that still hung down from underneath the hat and collar to rest on a familiar humongous scroll with red and white parchment lined with intricate black writing over the exterior. The massive scroll, which Yukio still didn't know the true purpose of, was haphazardly slung over the man's right shoulder to rest behind him at a horizontal angle near his hips. The Yukige had of course been insistent that they go to the Chunin exams for a promotion after completing several higher-ranked missions, though these were obviously all actual C ranks this time, but had also, oh so graciously, decided to inform them all that Enichi Zaraki had been some such or other close relative of the water daimyo, a favored cousin or niece or something. Either way, to make it official, Hidan had since been added to Mist's bingo books as Hidan no Fumetsu, or rather Hidan the Immortal, and been branded with kill-on-sight orders and an interesting bounty. All in all, the whole situation had turned into a recipe for disaster just waiting to happen. It was first, after reminding Hidan who Enichi Zaraki was, suggested they take a different Jonin sensei with them to the exams given Hidan's brand spanking new S rank, 1, shinobi status. The S ranking was more for Enichi Zaraki's apparent political ties than Hidan's skills, or so Emi said, in the bingo books in the hopes of avoiding any possible conflict with the representatives Mist and its allies were likely to send. Yukio had in response been the loudest of the protesters to this new idea, though Emi and Nanashir had still each been vehemently against the proposition themselves. In fact, all three genin had actually taken a page out of Hidan's book. They camped out in the Yukige's office to annoy him incessantly until the man caved. It took 3 days straight of knocking over inhumanly large stacks of important-looking paperwork, yammering on in the old Kage's ear and poking him, but eventually they got their way and would not be leaving the village without Hidan any time soon. Sadly, this brought them back to their original problem, the possibility of Hidan being recognized by the wrong people as a newly christened S-rank shinobi, or, as found in Kiri's bingo books, an S-rank criminal, and met with hostility because of it. So, with no other options other than just not go, it had been decided that they'd have to wing it. The Yukige had given Hidan his hat and ordered the man to hide his face as best he could to help hide his identity. Yukio physically cringed when he remembered Hidan's reaction to the hat itself, as well as being told he'd have to hide his identity, and most likely tone down on his usual antics while in the Hidden Leaf. Let's just say Hidan's response, and the end result of it, namely the Yukige's office and face, weren't at all pretty to behold for a while. Indeed, it was after that little episode that Yukio, Emi and Nanisher all unanimously agreed to avoid their Jonin sensei at any and all costs, even if they were meant to have training or missions and whatnot with the unstable shinobi. It was better than getting their collective asses repeatedly kicked and overall having to deal with an in general grumpy, agitated, and not happy at all Hidan for the several weeks left leading up to the exams. No. Instead, they got to travel with him for several hours straight in the actual piss-poor disguise and wished to God they just accepted the step-in sensei if only to avoid the mental and/or emotional trauma of it all. Naruto was not a happy camper, and he hadn't been for over a month now. For some reason or another, something had happened to Naruto on his first Genin-approved C-rank mission to Wind Country, and whatever it was, it had awakened something seriously wrong inside of him and Naruto just wanted it to stop. Now, and in case you're wondering, no, Hidan's old personality and/or consciousness was not making a miraculous comeback and forcing Naruto to do unspeakable things. It was the original Jashinist's memories that were screwing him over. When Naruto first arrived in this new era and wanted to know more about the body, the person, whose life he now inhabited, he hadn't known at the time how naive he was to think such a thing was in any way, shape, or form a good idea. Even after only gaining a few select memories, more like traumatic nightmare-inducing first-person observances, of Hidan's past, Naruto was, while disturbed, still undoubtedly curious. It had taken being near physically assaulted by these stray recollections of events he'd never actually been a part of, even if it sometimes felt like he had, for Naruto to realize that he was completely out of his depth this time. Hell, even Kurama wasn't handling the knowledge they'd received, and that was saying something. Instead, Naruto gradually lost his appetite, and began to lose sleep too until he was a barely functioning ball of rage, not unlike how Kurama had been in the beginning. The truth was that Hidan's life was driving him crazy, and Naruto didn't know how to stop or fix it. He sure as hell didn't know how to hide it. He'd taken to blaming his atrocious, and often lethal, mood on the upcoming Chunin exams, the fifth one to ever be held apparently, and let everyone come to their own conclusions about the why part of the equation. He sure as hell couldn't mention anything even vaguely resembling time travel, identity crisis, night terrors, a lack of sleep, lack of appetite, lack of will to live, etc. At least not while every half-decent psychiatrist and two-bit doctor within 100 miles of Yugakure already had a hard-on at the idea of cracking Naruto's head open and watching for what made him, function, stifling a sigh that would no doubt distract his Genin students from their curiosity, whilst also subtly taking in the sight of his former village for himself, and it was his former village. He was a Yugakure shinobi now. Naruto tried almost desperately to put a lid on his too turbulent emotions. Strolling leisurely through the streets of the one place he'd longed to see for the last around about 6 years wasn't making this gargantuan task any easier though. Well, I think it's nice. Emi sniffed at them both, her arms crossed tightly over the black and blue cheapao dress she'd started wearing a few weeks after their first C-rank gone wrong. Naruto studiously ignored the way the girl's doe-like eyes widened almost comically, and her shoulders tensed when she realized just who she'd snapped at. Instead, he focused on how Emi's tone of voice wasn't too whiny like Yukio's tended to be, nor was it monotone and droll like Nanisher was always, because on any other day Hidan wouldn't have a problem. Today, however, he'd had exactly 0 sleep in the last 49.2 hours and one too many recollections of what amounted to Orochimaru scales slaughter porn. Even Kurama remained silent, trying desperately not to push it for once. Taking these facts into account, it was unsurprising that just the sound of the little brunette's usually pleasant voice was enough to put Naruto's teeth on edge. Not even so much as glancing in her direction. He figured he'd be fine if he just ignored the existence of his students altogether. And then he got lost in his thoughts again, and tried not to think about how killing someone with a thermometer of all things was a lot easier than he'd always thought it should be once the correct technique was applied. Back in the real world, however, where Yukio had finally opened his big mouth to reply to Emi's earlier barb, Hidan immediately knew he had to find an exit and fast. His temper was far too frayed, just like it was all those 6 and a bit years ago when he first arrived in this timeline. If his genin got into it now, he wasn't sure what he'd do. Without a doubt his reaction would end in wholesale murder, regardless of how it began. As it was, he could stand maybe 3 more minutes tops of human interaction before he exploded. It's nice? Ha, alright. Looks like it's time for some preventative measures, i.e. best temporarily disappear and maybe desecrate a training field or 3 lest there be a whole lot more dead people around here than there should be. Emi could feel the color draining from her face at an otherwise impressive pace after she realized how she'd just spoken to Hidan Sensei. Sure, Yukio had been included in the remark, but was her sensei likely to see it that way? No. If anything, he'd likely be more pissed at having been brought down to her idiotic teammate's level. Or something like that. Not good, not good. I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die. The genin mentally chanted, almost afraid to look at her sensei lest she set him off even more. However, several moments of tense silence passed, and from her peripheral vision she could see her sensei still keeping pace on the other side of Yukio, having never so much as paused at her remark. You're not dead yet, so maybe he didn't hear you. Yes, that's it. He didn't hear you. Just don't draw attention to yourself again, and you'll be fine. Emmy tried valiantly to calm herself. It's nice? Ha! Yukio snorted, instantly breaking Emmy from her internal panicking with a more than welcome distraction. You're just saying that 'cause there's so many pretty flowers and stuff here. Did she say welcome distraction? No, she meant boorish misogynistic gender-biased comment that made her want to hit Yukio in his stupid face and maybe strangle him with his own bandana. Repeatedly, F flowers. Emmy spluttered, eyes narrowed in agitation as she turned on the stupid boy, though she didn't quite understand where that had come from. Since when had she ever given Yukio the impression that she was interested in flowers? The medicinal herbs and remedies one could make with them, sure. But flowers just because? What the heck? Did she look like some flaky fangirl to him? Nanisher grunted. It was only through careful months of studying her distant teammates' body language and microfacial expressions that Emmy was able to, sort of, confidently guess he was defending her from Yukio's perplexing but nonetheless offensive statement. Oh, shut up, bastard! Was Yukio's oh-so-intelligent retort. You understood him? Emmy questioned, still angry, but her curiosity was slowly winning out. She didn't know Yukio spoke emo. She herself was only just steadily picking up the basics necessity after months of careful observation. Just how fluent was her only non-emo teammate? No. But I know it was derogatory, Yukio said with another sneering glare at Nanisher, who remained uncaring of the less-than-friendly expression. Derogatory, Emmy corrected with a tired sigh. It appeared she'd expected way too much from her stupid teammate. Too weary after the long journey and the constant tiptoeing around Hidan Sensei to keep her indignant anger alive, Emmy instead tried to concentrate on where they were going, glancing at the crude hand-drawn map. With some vague directions scribbled in the margin, still clutched in her hand, the girl idly noted that they should have about 4 more blocks to go before they reached their prearranged hotel. If she was reading this shoddy map right anyway, whatever. Yukio finally muttered after taking a little too long considering her rebuttal. This sadly got Yukio fired up for another round. See, Emmy, even Nanisher agrees with me, There was a brief pause, and then everything changed. Hey, where's Sensei? As soon as that final sentence left Yukio's lips, their small procession came to a grinding halt. Already icy fear began its creeping ascent up Emmy's spine, the consequences of those last innocent words leaving the poor genin near catatonic. Oh my god! We lost Hidan Sensei! Yukio cried. Emmy still wasn't really looking at him though, so she didn't actually need to witness for herself the dawning horror no doubt etching itself into her fellow teammates' paling expression. You see, Emmy herself was a little too busy staring straight ahead into the dark abyss currently encroaching in on her dulling vision. If she didn't breathe soon, she knew she was going to faint. She was, however, also having a distinct issue with caring about that at the moment, instead focusing on a far more vital issue than the burning tightness building in her chest and lungs. No, 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 and oh! Emmy mentally screamed. In an instant her head was snapping from side to side as she desperately looked about the area for her wayward sensei, because she was pretty damn sure her life depended on this entire situation being a petty, terrifying figment of her overactive imagination. All she found were civilians, some local and foreign shinobi, and several bustling stalls all piled with varying goods. There was absolutely no sign of Hidan Sensei. Worse. Emmy spoke, though to her own voice sounded too far away and distant under the rapid flutter of her panicked heartbeat. It might not have even been her speaking at all. The voice echoing in her ears was far too calm to have been hers right now. We lost Hidan Sensei in the middle of someone else's ninja village, and now we're doomed. She internally wailed, her active mind already conjuring several dozen different scenarios this little, total, complete, sheer, absolute, unmitigated disaster could, and likely would, end in. Fuck. Nanisher actually cursed, once again revealing his, for him, turbulent reaction to the situation through his articulation of an actual comprehensible word. It was at this point that Emmy decided she needed to breathe again. She needed to stay conscious lest she leave it up to Yukio and Nanisher to find Hidan Sensei and live to tell about it before said jonin did something everyone, bar Hidan Sensei, would all at some point, very quickly, regret. He can't have gone too far though, right? Yukio asked, looking just as desperate now as Emmy felt. I mean, He knows he can't just murder people in broad daylight or anything, so he should be fine until we find him, right? Yukio, Emmy groaned whilst wringing her fingers with anxiety. Not even 10 minutes in a new village, and she was already stressed and terrified almost beyond belief. It's Hidan Sensei. So assume the worst? Nanushir suggested. It appeared he too was resigned to their fates. If only Yukio would wake up to himself and realize that wherever Hidan went, widespread death and en masse amounts of property damage were sure to follow. Yes. Emmy sighed in tired resignation. By this point we should probably just assume he's halfway through hunting down the Hokage or something and act accordingly. Why don't we just hunt him down then? Yukio blurted in response, forcing Emmy to stare rather pointedly at the boy until he thought that one through for a second and realized exactly just how stupid of an idea it truly was. Right, it's Hidan. We're not suicidal just quite yet, so no trying to fight him without getting ourselves brutally murdered first. Got it. Yukio blushed, now looking down as though his sandal-clad feet were the most interesting things in the world at that moment. Sorry, I got a bit carried away. Didn't actually think before I spoke. You never do. Nanushir replied in a droll monotone, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. Hey, shut it, why? Yukio, Nanushir, stop. Emmy hissed before they could start fighting. They didn't have time for petty arguments. They had to somehow find and retrieve Hidan Sensei without dying horribly in the process. We have bigger things to worry about without you two instigating some sort of testosterone-fueled peeing contest. She reiterated angrily. But Emmy, Hidan Sensei is on his own in a foreign village and, as you've no doubt already realized, he's still in the same mood he's been in for the last month or more. He's also in the book now and wearing that hat he hates and doing only God knows what. Emmy hissed in Yukio's still too pale face. Are you really just going to stand there when our crazy-as-heck teacher is gallivanting about unsupervised and probably at this very moment slowly killing off some poor sops for so much as breathing the same air as him? You're right. Yukio finally nodded in agreement before turning to look at Nanushir with a strange though not insignificant expression on his face. As far as Emmy could tell, it was actually some sort of secret silent truce of temporary cooperation that passed between the two boys with but a glance. Maybe Yukio was more fluent in emo than Emmy gave him credit for. Okay, it won't take Sensei that long to find this village's ANBU headquarters. Yukio stated grimly, his expression now undeniably serious as he spoke. They're all probably dead by this point anyway if it's anything like last week when those ANBU came in for that weird report while we were hiding from him under the Yukage's desk. I guess that gives us a place to start at least. Hopefully we can isolate his probable targets and work from there. If we're fast and Sensei's feeling creative, we might even be able to limit the casualties a little. Emmy agreed in turn, equally as focused on the monumental task set before them. Turning to her final teammate, seeing if he had anything else to add, Emmy, for once, wasn't at all shocked when Nanushir once again articulated his thoughts properly in the face of almost certain doom. We'd best start planning then, the redhead grunted in support, and, in perfect tandem, the three genins set out to do the impossible. Hiruzen Sarutobi wasn't quite sure what he'd just walked in on. At first he thought it was some sort of game, just another innocent little amusement constructed by some such or other civilian child to pass the time away. The three kids huddled in front of Hiruzen weren't that much older than him, maybe a few years tops. So without the adult status and responsibilities that came with being a ninja, there'd been some credit to the theory. At least there was until Hiruzen caught sight of metal plates flashing in the sunlight filtering down from between the overhanging roofs into the isolated alleyway. Then all Hiruzen could see was three foreign shinobi crouched over several suspicious-looking documents, all far too serious and twitchy to be simple unescorted visitors. Hey, who are you? Hiruzen had at first tried to interrupt the small gathering of foreigners, anticipating a few startled jumps and maybe a shriek from the lone girl amongst them at his seemingly sudden presence nearby. He had received none of it. Instead, the three shinobi just went on about their business, whatever the hell that was, poring over what appeared to be several crude maps, a cluster of very official, very stolen, blueprints, and some shorthand notes. All in all, everything about the situation was suspicious. They were suspicious, and yet they continued to ignore him, even after another 4 failed attempts at gaining the foreigner's ever-elusive attention. Aight, we've got a basic map of the village now. All we have to do is divide our targets and split up accordingly. It's our best be. Oh, you three, I'm talking to you. Hiruzen had shouted again only a minute later, the sheer irritation he felt having broken through his otherwise impressive emotional barriers to blatantly color not only his facial expressions, but also his tone of voice. Air security looks shakiest here, and here. We'll need to hit all of them in quick succession if we want to stand a chance of actually pulling this off though. Hello. Hamura, still only a new arrival by that point, had stuttered out in one of his own attempts at interrupting what sounded like a small impromptu war council. Can they even hear us? Koharu wondered aloud, her tone incredulous, only a few short communication attempts later. Do you think before Sensei eventually reaches the Hokage Tower? HN. The red-haired one finally grunted, the first sign of input either Hiruzen or his disgruntled teammates had heard from this boy so far. That wasn't really what startled them though. It was what the redhead had said, or rather, what he hadn't said at all. The sound that had escaped the redhead's lips had in itself immediately brought dozens of new questions to Hiruzen's racing mind. One important query stood out in stark contrast to the others though. Could this boy, despite his physical appearances to the contrary, somehow be related to the Uchiha? Or was he just naturally that emo somehow? Because Tobirama-sensei always said that inhuman levels of emo like that were restricted exclusively to the Uchiha clan and only through a hereditary defect of some kind contracted via all the inbreeding. Depends on how long he spends in the ANBU building. The girl of the group said lowly in reply to whatever the red-haired maybe Uchiha's earlier grunt had meant, breaking Hiruzen from his hasty theories. And had she seriously just capitalized that pronoun? They were still only talking about their sensei, right? That's one of these ones I don't think they're going to listen to us, Sarutobi. Koharu spoke again, not even bothering to lower her voice. You don't know for sure where he'll go first, so we have to be prepared. Got it? You got it, Emmy. HN. Arg. That godforsaken noise again. Hey! Hiruzen finally screamed at the very top of his lungs, sick and tired of standing at the mouth of the dingy alleyway watching these annoyingly ignorant people so blatantly plan an assault on his home. And amazingly, it seemed to do the trick. Hello. Can we help you? The girl stuttered in reply to his outburst, big brown doe-like eyes watering, and turned on Hiruzen like a weapon of mass destruction. Hiruzen wouldn't fall for it though. He couldn't. Not after having witnessed this girl pitch and all but spearhead what sounded like a full-scale coup d'etat to cripple their village from within alongside a corresponding external invasion to finish the job. Who are you? Hiruzen demanded harshly of the girl, his fists balled uselessly at his sides. He was determined not to be the first to resort to violence. Tobirama-sensei always told them to do so whenever possible. There was a lesser chance of implicating themselves that way, and that if violence was unavoidable, then they should at least make sure conditions were favorable to them over the enemy. This knowledge sadly did not make the task of keeping his anger and annoyance confined to a verbal outlet until the other side instigated a more physical battle any easier though. Well, the name's Yukio Sano, remember it? Another boy exclaimed rather enthusiastically, and no, this was not the redhead maybe Uchiha. This third bandana kid wasn't nearly as interesting, or irritating, though it was a close second, as the maybe Uchiha boy. Not you, loser. Hiruzen frowned before gesturing to the girl and the maybe Uchiha standing on either side of the supposed Yukio boy. You too, HN, Nanashur, he's Nanashur. The girl replied, much calmer now, though she also confirmed Hiruzen's suspicions that none of these names were accurate, only false leads and aliases. Nobody was that unfortunate, not nearly enough to have actually been named no name from birth anyway. And I'm Emmy. Now you know our names, you three would be. Hiruzen stared uncomprehending at the three foreign shinobi for a moment. Instead he took time to take in the girl's conflicting features, a nervous smile and those doe-like eyes contrasting too much with the horrible scar that marred her face. The loser's overly expressive tendencies. What kind of idiot shinobi so blatantly pouted like that anyway? And the maybe Uchiha's silent glare, that hand twitching for his tanto probably wasn't a good sign either now that Hiruzen thought about it. In all, these strange shinobi had stupid, innocent, and/or irrelevant appearances with odd, contrasting personalities. Hiruzen didn't know how they were supposed to work as a team, and he wouldn't have believed they could if he hadn't already witnessed them in action. They were dangerous, Hiruzen eventually decided, simultaneously labeling them as such in his mind. Dangerous with harmless exteriors, and they were inside his village, planning something. This did not bode well. Nanashur and Emmy. Hiruzen muttered, eyes narrowed in contemplation. When no one, not even his own teammates, made a move to continue the confrontation for a few more seconds though, Hiruzen made his move. Alright then, I'm Hiruzen Sarutobi. These are my teammates Hamura Mitokado and Koharu Yudatane. First, establish contact. Second, gain trust. Third, backstab hard then watch the show. It was a simple, easy plan and by no means perfect. But Tobirama-sensei always said a good plan only stayed a good plan until the first instance of execution anyway. It was overall better to have a few simple goals in mind with fewer complicated details to get bundled up in later. It was the same way for lies, after all. That's nice. The loser Yukio uttered sarcastically with a deep frown etched into his dumb face. We're kind of busy right now though, so maybe you can come back lat. The loser never got to finish his rebuttal. Not before his voice died with the sudden stiffening of his entire demeanor. His dark eyes were wide with apparent shock, or was that fear? And then suddenly a new voice was interrupting them all, and altering everything. Well. What do we have here? Spinning on their heels, Hiruzen and his teammates startled at the realization that there was someone standing right behind them. Hiruzen didn't want to think about how disappointed Tobirama-sensei would be if he ever found out about their inattentiveness, and thus resolved to never so much as think of this specific incident again. Instead, he focused on the man now standing in front of him. The first thing Hiruzen noticed was his height. The man was taller than Tobirama-sensei and Hokage-sama. Incredibly long silvery hair, tied up in some sort of ponytail or topknot, peeked out from underneath the straw conical hat the man had pulled low over his face to hide his eyes. The unusual color of his hair could have been a substantial clue. Hiruzen himself had only personally seen such shades in one of Konoha's more recent editions, a smaller shinobi family called Hataki. A heavy black knee-length cloak with a red inner lining and a high collar zipped all the way up hid the rest of the man's other possible distinguishing features. Only glimpses of a straight nose and what appeared to be high cheekbones managed to be seen from underneath the heavy clothing and hat. The only other really distinctive aspects of this stranger's appearance that Hiruzen could clearly make out was the black nail polish staining the man's fingertips, and the large scroll slung precariously over his right shoulder. Hiruzen opened his mouth, maybe to coolly tell the man to mind his own goddamn business, or even demand to know who he was too. Hiruzen didn't get a chance to find out. Mostly because the girl, Emi, chose then to nervously speak up once more. Sensei. While Hiruzen tried to process that new fact, that this was the terrifying sensei? The one supposedly invading ANBU buildings and targeting the Hokage Tower? His teammates were thankfully faster on the uptake. So, you're their Jonin sensei? Koharu sneered, and Hiruzen didn't have to look to know she'd given the sensei a few unimpressed once-overs before and after she spoke. You look like a joke. I was kind of expecting more. Our sensei is the Hokage's brother, you know. The genin boasted proudly, a superior smirk erupting onto her youthful face. Says a bunch of brats. The sensei shot back in reply, his tone more amused than insulted, though there was something else inexplicably mixed in with that deep voice too. Something very, very wrong. How old are you kids anyway? 10. Hiruzen snapped back, more on edge than ever before, though he couldn't quite figure out why just yet. Who was this man? We are prodigies, you know. Hiruzen continued through his creeping discomfort, a tiny part of him pissed off, underneath his unsubstantiated anxiety, by the sensei's attitude and yet, still ultimately annoyed at how utterly uncomfortable he found himself to be in the man's presence. Right. The sensei replied with obvious false sincerity. There was something different now, something darker than before lurking under that heavy cloak. A part of Hiruzen suddenly wanted to see the man's face and try to read his expression. Maybe then the genin prodigy would have some idea of who or what he was dealing with. Another part of Hiruzen, however, a part far larger and more intrinsically aware of his own survival instincts than the first, decided that that wasn't really a good idea after all. Not with the way the sensei seemed to tense even further at Hiruzen's input. You don't believe there are prodigies out there, shinobi? Hamura frowned, rightly picking up on just how very little the sensei obviously thought of them, probably after Hiruzen's use of the P-word. No. The sensei replied, voice calm and almost tranquil despite the words set to spill from the man's mouth. I think there are natural honest-to-the-sage geniuses, and then there's a bunch of stuck-up little twats with some talent and corresponding sticks in their asses proclaiming to be prodigies to get out of real work. I also believe that there are people in this world dumb enough to humor and cater to those so-called prodigies simply because it'd be easier to do so than actually try and pry those 10-foot poles out of their asses and make them be normal human beings for once rather than spoiled, ungracious little assholes. By the end of his impromptu rant, the man's voice had deepened and darkened into a blood-chilling growl. But he hadn't moved, hadn't made one direct threat to any of them whether with his words or actions, so why were the hairs at the back of Hiruzen's neck rising with every new syllable spoken, as though each and every utterance was in itself a threat and a promise of something painful, and heinous and simply indescribable, yet to come? It wasn't killing intent like anything Hiruzen had felt, not even like that one time Tobirama-sensei tried to desensitize them himself. This was new and maybe worse because it felt more like Hiruzen's own doing than the sensei's conscious projection of murderous thoughts and chakra. This was instinct, pure and simple, And now he knew he was correct to label this man's genin team as dangerous. Because if his genin were strong enough to survive this man, then they had the right to be dangerous. But if they were simply dangerous, then that meant the monster who trained them was even more so. And that was a terrifying thought. Hiruzen wasn't quite sure Koharu or Hamura had quite made this leap in logic yet. Heir, come on, you three, the sensei finally sing-songed at his students, his tone suddenly airy and jovial once again as he spun on the heels of his sandaled feet to wander off in the direction of Konoha's slowly expanding tourist center. Hiruzen wasn't fooled though. Not even a little bit. If I remember correctly, we have places to be. The sensei called over his shoulder, spurring his otherwise immovable students into action. All right. The loser, Yukio, shouted in reply. Sure thing, Hidan sensei. The girl chimed in turn. Okay. The red-haired maybe but probably not Uchiha nodded before the three dangerous unknowns followed after their deadlier monster of a sensei, their pace probably a tad too fast to be considered a normal civilian speed. Hiruzen watched them go, unsure of what he was supposed to do next. Did he take it to someone else? A Jonin, even Hokage-sama perhaps? Maybe Tobirama-sensei. The Hokage's brother always had good advice. He'd know what to do. Or maybe, you heard them too, right? Hiruzen turned to his longtime friends and teammates, his anxious gaze begging them for their opinions and ideas. He couldn't do this alone. He couldn't afford to mess up and learn from his mistakes like last time at that bandit camp or the mission before when Tobirama-sensei had to take the night shift himself because Hiruzen decided to eat some bad berries. No mistakes like that, because if those genin were a threat then that sensei wasn't playing around either, and that wasn't something Hiruzen wanted to think about. There was just something deeply wrong with that guy, and he didn't know how to categorize or explain it. Not yet. He needed time. He needed help. He needed. Hamura only nodded his head in agreement though, his expression intense as he no doubt tried to puzzle out all he'd seen and heard. Who were those people and what did they want? What were their motives and what did they mean by it though? Hamura muttered, more to himself than anyone else. As usual, isn't it obvious? Koharu hissed at both of her teammates, her head held imperiously high as she spoke. They're planning something against the village, and yes, that had been Hiruzen's first guess too. But that was before him. Maybe those foreign genin weren't completely bonkers about that pronoun thing after all. We should tell Sensei. Hiruzen finally decided, because the truth was they didn't have enough facts by themselves to know anything for sure. Before the sensei's arrival, the case had been pretty clear-cut in Hiruzen's mind and his plan even more so. First, establish contact. Second, gain trust. Third, backstab. Not anymore though. Because that plot was now completely unfeasible. Useless in any and every context after the sudden appearance of the sensei. Tobirama-sensei always said to trust his gut instincts, and Hiruzen's instincts were screaming and bellowing at him that he wouldn't get within 100 yards of the sensei or his team without the deadly shinobi noticing it, and subsequently somehow rendering poor Hiruzen lifeless for the sorry attempt. But what could they do? What could they do? What would we say? Hamura finally spoke up again. We overheard a genin team talking about our village and their sensei? The bespectacled boy asked them disbelievingly, and maybe he had a point. Or maybe, no, we heard three unknown individuals sousing out the village's layout, more specifically ANBU headquarters and the Hokage Tower. Hiruzen corrected his friend. We also heard them discussing village security and hitting places in succession as well as mentioning targets. From this information we can gather that those three will be doing something untoward and separate as of yet unknown locations, while a fourth party known only as Sensei will be hitting ANBU headquarters and the Hokage Tower in no known order. The Sarutobi clan heir finally finished his rather strong, in his opinion anyway, argument. You think Tobirama-sensei will buy that? Hamura asked again, eyebrows raised and everything. Oh, ye of little faith. Of course he will. Koharu exclaimed, her eyes suddenly wide and alight with enthusiasm and maybe something else. Something Hiruzen liked to think of as the ever-mysterious will of fire Hokage-sama liked to talk about so much. Well, at least he hoped it was the will of fire. He didn't want to think about what other strange combination of thought and emotion could make that, almost quite definitely maybe sadistic, expression appear on Koharu's face. You mean until he realizes it's actually just a genin team from hot water? Hamura mumbled. So that's where they were from. I'll agree that there was something a bit off about the sensei, Hamura conceded after another moment of thought, hopefully having finally caught on to the threat these people posed it, at least a little bit, seemed, before he had to go and ruin it again. But without any solid proof you won't get far, Hiruzen. Then we get proof. Was Hiruzen's final answer, his mind made up. First, find evidence. Second, tell Tobirama-sensei. Third, sit back and watch the show. Simple. Kohara nodded in agreement. Easy. Hiruzen grinned and, fine. Hamura finally sighed, giving in to the age-old decision-maker that was peer pressure. It was music to Hiruzen's ears. Chapter 12, Part 1, Chapter 11. Hands? Soft, delicate, burning hands? And they were everywhere. Hidan bit back another moan as one brushed against a more sensitive area, only to swiftly slip away once more. Gods, what a tease. You shouldn't be here, doing this. He tried to tell her yet again. This one special person who was as precious to him as the greatest fortunes of kingdoms and knowledge of the wisest sages of old. His warning lacked conviction, however. Maybe he shouldn't have let it go on this far? Not after last time anyway. They'd almost been caught. Why did he allow this then, when it was so risky for them both? A stray sigh of contentment erupted from her, interrupted only by another of Hidan's strangled moans. Right, question answered. He already knew exactly why he always inevitably let her have her way. Spoiled princess. He thought fondly before a nip to his naked chest, soothed an instant later by her sweet lips, distracted him. He really should learn to focus more. No, probably not. She whispered against his skin, and Hidan somehow dredged up the strength to strangle out one last plea, for both of their lives and their sanity. Please, Kay. Shh! She hissed at him through their shared bliss and passion. And he knew why too. That was far too serious talk for a time like this. Now was a time to just lay there on this hastily appropriated bed and feel for a while. No more talking, no more worries, just feeling, and none of that. She pleaded, and Hidan was helpless to her will. Again, aren't you supposed to do this sort of thing? One deep breath in, a hurried find your train of thought already, Hidan, and then he could carry on again. These things with the man you love? But I am. What a minx she was as she sat astride him, naked as the day she was born, with that secret smile meant only for him, all but plastered on her pretty face. You know what I mean. Hidan huffed, his hands rising to play with her hair until her resolve to pout at him finally waned. And it would wane because she did know, she knew exactly what Hidan meant. Long crimson tresses, like finely spun silk, it slipped easily through his fingers in. But this was wrong, he tried to remind himself. Yes, it was. But why again? He couldn't quite seem to remember, not with those delicious fingers finally trailing back down his side again. And those lips, no. He had to focus. Focus. This did feel sort of nice though. And wrong. Very wrong. There wasn't a distinct reason for any of this to be wrong though. Not any one specific thing he could name anyway. Not her being technically engaged to marry another man or sneaking around with Hidan behind the backs of the many others she considered her precious people. No, that decidedly wasn't it, even though these reasons probably should have given him more pause than they did. This was different, the voice screeching and bellowing deep in the back of his mind, the one shouting at the top of its lungs, wrong, wasn't so morally based but more instinctive and deep. There was just something inherently wrong with this beautiful woman he was supposed to, love. He just didn't know what, and you know what I mean. The wily temptress whispered in his ear, Hidan, just for tonight. She pleaded, and who was he to deny her? A voice of reason. Because this is wrong. You don't need to know why. It's just wrong. Remember Hidan? We can't, as you very well know, Hidan tried to explain, a lump forming in his throat as he spoke. Because he was at war with himself, as she very well knew. His body and heart told him one thing, stay with the pretty princess, while his mind cried another, wrong. Run away, I'd be killed for sure, and you'd, for sneaking around with another man, with me you'd. He didn't have to finish his sentence. He didn't really know how to, but they both knew anyway. Getting caught was not an option. Not yet, because, I have a plan. Yes, that's right, she did. She told him many times before that she had one, and yet, one you refused to speak of. Hidan bit out between another gasped moan of ecstasy. That particular stroke had felt absolutely wonderful. Now how to get her to do it again, and exactly what were they supposed to be talking about? It's a good plan. She insisted, and suddenly he remembered again. Ah, yes. Right. The plan. But maybe she wasn't the only one with a plan though. That could make things more interesting, or utterly ruin everyone involved. He'd have to consider it, later. Later, when those wonderful, cursed, sinfully amazing hands weren't slowly working him into a frenzy he surely wouldn't resurface from. I'm sure. He grunted. It is. You'll see, she said with another secret smile. Gods! She was beautiful, and wrong. Right. This was wrong, wasn't it? But how? He still didn't know. And when my plan's finally successful, she continued, I'll be able to leave my beloved betrothed and join you without a fuss. We won't be hunted, you won't ever have to fight, there will be only us, and this. Any future involving copious amounts of this sounded wonderful. But at what cost? Wrong, what a wonderful dream. Hidan lamented before planting a short gossamer kiss of his own on her soft molten lips, and maybe that was the problem. This was all a dream. Every last little bit of it. It had to be because she was supposed to be gone, and he was alone again with only Jashin and the kids and Kurama and, wait a minute, what in fuck was a Kurama? It will be reality too. You'll see. She breathed, so sure of herself, but Hidan. Did Hidan see it? Did he naively imagine that this supposed future of theirs, this blinding hope, was a viable option in the harsh days to come? No. He really didn't. Well, that certainly was interesting. And disturbing. Definitely the second thing too. At first the vision had started out just like any other. There was unconsciousness on Naruto's part followed by a vomit-inducing swirl of indistinct colors and shapes set to take them both on a psychedelic trip to dreamland. Once their Kurama and its host would inevitably be forced to live through and experience an all-new first-hand recount of any one event, or events, that had already come to pass in Hidan's long life. Given this knowledge, Kurama hadn't been too worried when the drug trip began as it had every other night for the last few months. The gargantuan fox had actually been mildly relieved to notice a surprising lack of spilt entrails and or brain matter smeared left, right and center once the scene began. The bijou didn't hold out much hope that wouldn't change later on, but it was the thought that counted. Because if there was one thing Kurama could agree with its host on, it was the fact Hidan had been one messed up little meatbag, even by Kurama's exhaustive standards. Keeping this in mind, it had been a bit of a shock to notice Dream Hidan had began the vision acting odd. And when Kurama said odd, the bijou meant relatively sane, two words that should never be used in the same sentence as Hidan without some serious negative adverbs thrown in. It was of course only a few minutes after coming to this conclusion that Dream Hidan's guest arrived, and then everything subsequently went to shit. From that point onward, the vision lasted for what felt like an eternity. The images and sensations wrought were unmentionable and Kurama didn't really want to think about them. It was completely understandable that Naruto's reaction was worse though. Awoken from the vision only minutes ago now, Naruto had let loose a single hoarse scream, panicked and almost shrieking before it died away again. And then finally there was sage-be-blessed silence. Kurama still isn't sure why the sudden quiet that followed bothered it so much. Then again, living in Naruto's head had always been a bit on the noisy side, even when the brat wasn't directly manifesting himself in their shared mindscape. At least there was always something new or relatively interesting for Kurama to see and hear through its host's varying senses. Things had naturally picked up even further in the last few years too. Naruto's gradual integration of some of Hidan's stronger personality traits had changed Kurama's Jinchuriki enough to make even the most mundane of things interesting again, even without the imminent threat of Akatsuki or the direct interference of those sulky bastard Uchihas. Thankfully, Naruto's changes, while severe in some areas, had at the same time never really changed the core of who the now silver-haired shinobi was. Kurama usually tried not to think about why Naruto's continued Naruto-ness mattered to it at all. Back to the present though. This new sudden quiet from Naruto, even in the physical realm, coupled with that thrice-be-damned incessant dripping sound that originated from within was beginning to tear at the fox's nerves like never before. This wasn't the first time Naruto had had such vivid dreams of times long since past after all. It was however the first time he'd witnessed a sexual encounter with a woman that was for all intents and purposes the spitting image of Kushina Uzumaki. Even Kurama, for all its inadequacies in human interaction and morals, knew that hadn't been right on a lot of leave. A nightmare. Naruto finally mumbled from between numb lips in the outside world. It was just a nightmare. Ever watching from behind the time traveler's violet eyes, Kurama witnessed near firsthand the disorientating shift from lying down to standing when Naruto suddenly decided to sit up and scan the room for threats. Or worse, witnesses. Naruto's limbs were shaking slightly and his chest still heaved in gasping staccato breaths, Kurama noted. Thankfully, after a few more moments of relative calm and some deep breathing techniques half remembered from that pink child teammate of his, she'd been called Sakura or Pansy or Flower something, right? The strange sensations calmed. Naruto was slowly beginning to rein himself in again and hopefully, he would soon process that hadn't actually been real. The procedure was, while a vast improvement, still slower in practice than the pink flower child had implied, though Kurama noted that Naruto, seeing those 3 teacup humans still curled up, and more importantly, unconscious, in varying amusing positions throughout the room, seemed to help. Finally laying his tense form back down into the nest of blankets and pillows he'd created the day before, Naruto turned his thoughts inwards, and there went Kurama's silence, wincing at the sudden increase in tempo and volume. Assaulted by hundreds of thoughts and images darting about their shared mindscape, Kurama did the only thing it could think to do. The great Bijou attempted to distract its host lest it be permanently blinded and or deafened by Naruto's distress. I told you seeing the monkey wouldn't make it any better. And maybe that wasn't the best choice of topics. What else was Kurama supposed to talk about though? The fox's poor abused head was already splitting with the migraine to end all migraines, and now its host's breathing had started to pick up again. The pink flower child had called it hyperventilate ing, right? It appeared Naruto had finally decided on a single topic for consideration, completely ignoring Kurama's previous effort. No, instead of thinking about Hiruzen Sarutobi for a while, a relatively safe option if Naruto didn't overthink the time travel thing again. Kurama's host was too busy trying to consider in horrifying detail which was worse, having seen his mother cheat on his father with what was now essentially another version of himself, or seeing that same mother naked. Kurama personally, through it had been the first-hand sexual experience at the woman's hands and mouth that had really shaken him, but whatever. In the end, Kurama didn't know for certain, and it didn't want to know at all. Who knew that Monkey Hokage was such an arrogant little sod before he went gray and wrinkly though, hey? And still no coherent response from Naruto. Well, nearly no response. Kurama didn't think the way his eye ticked counted much as a reliable form of communication. At least the previous all-consuming roar of Naruto's chaotic thoughts was starting to calm into something semi-intelligible. A bit surreal too, Kurama prattled on, the Monkey Hokage and his little fogey friends being so young. Kurama, Naruto murmured aloud, his voice sounding slightly strangled in his current emotional state. They barely reached your hips. The Bijou cackled, pleased that the issue of that had temporarily left the forefront of Naruto's mind in favor of said Jinchuriki's irritation with Kurama. Speaking off, Kurama, you're not helping me. Naruto hissed at the voice in his head. Kurama grinned to itself. Progress. I don't know, Kurama uttered slyly from within the confines of Naruto's mind, its wide toothy grin no doubt audible to its disheveled Jinchuriki. I thought I was doing a pretty bang-up job of distracting you, before you pissed on my parade anyway. Why did you have to go and ruin it? And no, the great Bijou did not just whine like one of those spoiled miniature meat bags. Nope, not at all. Kurama distinctly ignored the way Naruto's thoughts of irritation suddenly shifted back to that. When would the brat realize it was best to put what he just witnessed to the back of his mind and never again think on it? Ever. At least, that is what Kurama was going to do, as soon as Naruto and his wandering thoughts let it, that is. Ku, the woman she was. Here Kurama could only sigh, knowing exactly where this was going. That was my MO. No, she wasn't. Kurama interrupted its host, hoping to nip the effects of that in the bud before any truly unpleasant long-term consequences could fester as a result. What? That wasn't Kushina. Kurama told its perplexed Jinchuriki as plainly as possible. When it came to dealing with any version of Naruto, it was best to be as blatant and straight to the point as humanly possible to avoid confusion on the silver-haired brat's part, and the wasting of precious time on Kurama's. I'd know Kushina anywhere, kid, and that most certainly was not her. So relax. Neither you nor some Hidan of the past have defiled your mother. You're good to go. But she looked so much like her. Naruto tried to insist, only to trail off when his mind punished and betrayed him with a brief flashback to that. Flinching alongside its host, Kurama gritted its teeth against the remembered sensation of mortal fingers carting across their scalp and valiantly pushed onwards. The faster Kurama got Naruto to stop thinking about that, the better off they'd both be. That's because she probably was an Uzumaki of some description. Kurama explained stiffly, no doubt there's a relation there. Those meat-bagged clans of yours almost always look the same. You agree that I'm right? Right. Then we can also agree that that woman was not Kushina, but Kara. For one, the personality was all wrong. The fox huffed, remembering vividly, despite its best efforts, that while Kushina was a lot of things, seductive was sure as hell not one of them. More importantly though, I'd remember if she ever met Hidan for anything. I was sealed inside her too, you know. As much as I didn't pay much attention back then, I'd like to think I'd have noticed my host cheating on her beloved Minato-chan with an S-rank missing nin. Yes, you're right. I'm just tired? Stressed? slowly falling into the pits of insanity? Kurama offered its tired Jinchuriki, trying in vain to disguise its worried tone behind familiar dry sarcasm and amusement at Naruto's plight. A bit of everything, I think. Humph. Go back to sleep. We've got to be in top condition tomorrow for your genin. Kurama grumbled, a secret smile suddenly at its lips. Can't let Gamabunta or that yuckage bastard win our little bet, after all. Moreover, Kurama refused to lose to that juvenile overgrown toad ever again after the disappointing results of their last poker tournament. With Naruto now officially banned from ever playing any such games during their social get-togethers with the rambunctious amphibian Summons clan, under suspicion of chronically cheating and or being unfairly blessed by Lady Luck, Kurama liked to think it, and every other participant of such games finally had a chance of winning too for once. Sadly, Kurama still hadn't fared very well in the latest rounds of Baccarat, and had turned to making simpler verbal bets in the weeks since. As such, the great Bijou was determined to finally rub its imminent foregone victory in tiny Gamabunta's smug, wart-covered face. No matter the cost, there's no competition. Naruto replied with a derisive snort and a wide, devious smile of his own, his tired violet eyes seeming to lighten in anticipation. As much as he never admitted to their or anyone else's faces, he'd found he actually quite enjoyed Tortu teaching his genin. Those kids will scar the proctors for life and utterly wreck any genin brat stupid enough to get in their way. We made sure of it. There's no way Bunta or Old Man Kamizuki are winning this one. And with a wicked grin of its own, Kurama agreed. Very true, my friend. Kurama nodded sagely, before a rather interesting idea suddenly struck. And since we both know you're not actually going back to sleep anytime soon, what say you to a little nighttime expedition of sorts? I'm listening. Hamura Mitokata liked to think he was a good person, even if he was training to be a shinobi, a tool, a killer, a soldier, an assassin. Intelligent, logical, and loyal, he'd follow his friends to his death and defend his beloved home village even past that point. Did that mean he was especially happy to be dragged out of the warm comfort of his bed, a full 2 hours before he had to, by his overly enthusiastic and overzealous teammates on the day of his first Chunin exams, all in the name of protecting his beloved home village from the likes of 3 foreign genin and their creepy Jonin sensei? The answer was unsurprisingly a resounding no. We're really doing this then? Hamura sighed in dejected submission, not for the first time that day lamenting his inability to say no to Kohara's dreaded "you will do as I say if you want to live" face. Hiruzen called it her will of fire. Hamura usually labeled it horrifying. Speaking of Hiruzen though, sure. They'll hear us. The other boy hissed in reply, shoving at Hamura's shoulder from where all 3 genin had hidden atop the roof of the hot water team's accommodations for the duration of the Chunin exams. Just below them was a window which led to the foreign team's room. The glass pane was only wide open right now thanks to Kohara's slick moves and some lucky timing. Now all they had to do was stay out of sight and eavesdrop. Or at least, that's all they had to do according to Hiruzen. What the Sarutobi heir probably forgot to consider in his ever-youthful exuberance, however, was the distinct possibility that these shinobi, should they be halfway smart, and up to no good as both Kohara and Hiruzen insisted they were, might not say anything incriminating while there was a possibility they could be overheard. Hamura didn't mention this though, mostly because he didn't feel like taking one for the team via yet another sharp smack to the back of the head, courtesy of Koharu. Instead he held his silence, for now, and played along with what had to be the 1000th harebrained scheme in the last month alone. At least Hamura still had the hope that Hiruzen would eventually lose interest in the foreign genin or perhaps realize whatever conspiracy theory he'd concocted this time was utter bullshit, and otherwise inapplicable to reality. Again, fingers crossed. I know where he went. I swear! A male voice suddenly exclaimed at high volume, the pitch more piercing than normal, implying that the speaker was in some way distressed. Thinking back to yesterday, Hamura quickly concluded that the speaker in question must have been the taller boy who'd worn his Hittite sewn onto a bandana. His name was Yukio, if Hamura recalled correctly. Sensei was not in the room when we awoke. This voice was, while distinctly male, quieter and less expressive, nearly toneless in fact, and thus belonging to the redhead, Nanashir. Hamura didn't really buy into Hiruzen's theory that he was a bastard of the Uchiha clan, even though he too had noted the startling similarities between this foreign boy and the few Uchiha clansmen he himself had met in the past. Do you think he? And finally the girl, Emi, spoke, her words trailing off into some foregone conclusion that they all seemed to share if the following silence was anything to go by. It was only then that Hamura registered what they were talking about though, having safely identified who was speaking and when. His attention now firmly focused on the subject matter of their conversation, because it appeared that the sensei was missing, no doubt the cause of Yukio's audible distress. Though the question of why this was such a cause for concern worried Hamura in turn. From what he remembered hearing yesterday, the foreign team's sensei was absent for their impromptu planning session in the alleyway too. Were they just nervous being alone in a strange village? Or was it something else? What do we do? Execute drastic maneuvers or just split up and covertly look for him? Yukio asked, seeming to ignore Nanashi's monosyllabic contribution entirely. We could wait for him to show up again. Emi suggested, though her tone revealed all too well her doubts that such a conclusion was viable. There weren't too many casualties yesterday, that we know of. Nanashir interrupted the girl, and in an instant Hamura was on his guard, perhaps even more so than his overly paranoid teammates. Ignoring Koharu's death grip on his left wrist, Hamura's mind was racing because this was not at all a normal conversation. There was little way to misinterpret or otherwise mix up their conversation now. Their casual mention of casualties was nearly impossible to misunderstand, which made it all the more frightening. If they were serious, Sensei is awfully good at turning people into corpses and getting away with it. Emi dutifully agreed in an almost put-upon tone, as though burdened by the knowledge but desensitized to it. So, breakfast. All three foreign shinobi said in perfect unison, and then there was a brief shuffle of movement before three flashing blurs of motion could be seen flitting through the open window, no doubt taking to the rooftops. Hamura didn't wait to watch. Instead, he'd taken a strong hold of Hiruzen's shoulder at the first sign that they were leaving and pulled the other boy down over the other side of the angled roofing, Koharu close at his heels. After a few moments of waiting, just in case he thought, Hamura finally let go of Hiruzen and waited. It was only a matter of time before. Suspicious? Koharu murmured, her dark eyes narrowed in both curiousness and contempt. Very suspicious. Hiruzen agreed, his own tone low. Dear gods! It was starting. So the sensei wasn't there. Hamura said nervously, his hands shifting through the air in front of him in a series of dismissive gestures. So what? He tried, in vain, to placate the two. So, we follow them. Koharu declared righteously, and already Hamura was dreading. Once those stubborn fools he sometimes felt obligated to call friends decided on something, they hardly, if ever, let it go. This particular adventure of theirs was looking to be extra mysterious and thus, in all likelihood, never-ending. Because now their interest was officially piqued, Hamura doubted they'd break most previous patterns of behavior and move on with their lives. Oh no, that would be far too easy. Instead, Hiruzen and Koharu were going to obsess. And they were going to drag Hamura into it, kicking and screaming too. He could already tell by the contemplating expressions on their stupid scheming faces. There was no going back now. The only thing that could possibly stop them or put a pause to their no doubt ridiculous quest now was, follow who? A new voice asked, startling Hamura so suddenly he almost dropped his glasses, which he'd at some point in his contemplations taken off to fiddle with in his nervous state. Setting the precious spectacles back in their proper place atop his nose, Hamura turned around to face the intruder who was hovering over their crouched forms. Tobirama-sensei! Hiruzen exclaimed in obvious surprise, his smile blinding, and likely covering up the irritation he likely felt having been interrupted midway through what was looking to be his newest unholy obsession. What are you doing here, sensei? Hamura quietly asked of his teacher, never one to be deliberately rude to someone he respected so much. It was a good question though, wasn't it? What was Tobirama-sensei doing there? He'd obviously been in search of them for a specific reason. Had they somehow missed an appointment or last-minute training session with the elite Jonin? Hamura didn't remember any of them organizing anything for this day considering their exams were set to commence. But then again, with Tobirama-sensei one never really knew. I was just looking for my students. Tobirama-sensei replied, you do realize your exams start in another hour and a half, right? The Senju queried, curiosity plain in his tone. They do? Koharu exclaimed, eyes widening. She probably thought the first test began later on in the day, or completely lost track of time during their snooping and assumed the morning was still young. Oh. Hiruzen mumbled, also looking a little embarrassed. It appeared he too hadn't paid any attention to the time, which wasn't at all surprising to Hamura. Hiruzen was probably too busy thinking up increasingly stupid and or unrealistic conspiracy theories. Now the other boy had that team from Hot Water in his line of sight. He would begin casting at his leisure the appropriate villains in the latest sensation to grace Hiruzen Sarutobi's naive, fantasy world. Who were you following? Tobirama-sensei asked of them yet again, but Hamura wasn't surprised. Tobirama Senju was a very smart man after all, the very pinnacle of what a shinobi should be, just like his Hokage brother, and the Uchiha patriarch, Madara. He wasn't about to let go of what little of this debacle he'd already witnessed any more than Hiruzen and Koharu were, though Hamura knew his teammates' reasons were very different from their sensei's. No one. Hamura interrupted Koharu before she could answer. She would have no doubt been far too honest if allowed to continue. As scary and headstrong as the girl could be, she wasn't very keen on trying to lie to Sensei. Not like Hamura was. Because Hamura was intelligent, logical, but first and foremost, he was loyal. Don't get him wrong. He wasn't at all pleased with his teammates' propensity to make something of a situation that really wasn't there any more than he was eager to follow them on their latest quest to vilify the odd team from hot water. That didn't mean he would abandon them to Tobirama-sensei's no doubt disappointed and reproachful lecture should he learn ahead of schedule exactly what they were up to. That didn't mean Hamura wouldn't help his aggravating teammates when they inevitably got in over their heads or offended someone they shouldn't with their obsessive badgering and such. That didn't mean he wouldn't save their hides now, and use it as much needed leverage for later on when those stubborn idiots he called friends inevitably stuffed this up, endangering not only themselves but the lives of everyone they'd ever met, because it had happened before. Or at least, this way Hamura could threaten Hiruzen and or Koharu with Tobirama-sensei if, and when they got to the point of no return and he needed a strong enough deterrent to get through to them both. Liking his reasoning, Hamura took a deep breath to keep speaking, to keep lying. Because that's what friends do, apparently. We were thinking about trying out that stealth game again on a few of the visiting genin to see perhaps get some insight into the competition before the exams started. Hamura continued smoothly, his tone carefully apologetic as he wove methodical half-truths into a believable tale, even when lying to a shinobi of Tobirama-sensei's caliber. Sorry we forgot to find you, Sensei. And, HMIC, hook, line and sinker. Hamura thought, a small, large part of him rather smug that he'd actually managed to pull that off. As impressed as I am with your work ethic, Tobirama-sensei said very seriously before a small smile broke past his usually more severe demeanor. I think some food in your bellies might serve you better than a rudimentary training exercise. Alright. Hamura agreed, silently relieved when neither Hiruzen nor Koharu protested their sensei's demand. Because even as obsessive and stubborn as those two were, even they could see the truth of their situation right now. It was better to play along, have breakfast with their Jonin sensei and lose sight of their prey for a few hours than raise Tobirama-senju's suspicions, especially right after lying to the man's face. Emi hovered nervously by the entrance to a large stone building located just beneath the famed Hokage monument, shuffling from foot to foot as she waited impatiently for the rest of her team to arrive. The trio of genin had split up earlier to wander the streets of the Hidden Leaf village, and perhaps subtly search for their wayward homicidal sensei while they were at it. After their impromptu breakfast at a nearby cafe, all of them agreeing to meet a few minutes before the exams were scheduled to start. Emi thought it was a good call on their part to meet prior to the beginning of the exams, simply because she really needed her teammates' assurance right now. She couldn't help feeling nervous. What if they failed? What if they all got hurt? What if they all died? Emi knew that it was a very real possibility. She could already see it happening in her mind's eye. But then that begged the question, what would her parents, her village, her Kage say if they failed so spectacularly? What would their sensei say? Or rather, what would he do to them? Emi really didn't want to contemplate that particular scenario. Emi, do you think Hidan sensei will meet with us before the exams? Surprised, Emi turned to look at the source of the question. She never expected Nanisher to arrive so soon, or say so much without prior prompting. Hell, the fact that he'd asked at all alerted Emi to just how uncomfortable the red-headed boy must be. As our sensei he probably should, but knowing Hidan. Emi paused before releasing a tired, almost put-upon sigh, knowing him will be finished all of the exams by several days before he actually bothers to show up. She finished with a small half-smile and a shrug, her poor attempt at humor falling a little flat. The way Nanisher quirked a similar half-hearted expression in response however told her the truth, that she had just now reassured her teammate, and dare she say, friend, with that small show of quiet confidence and familiarity on her part. However, a similarly familiar shout of "Hey guys" both broke the moment, and alerted Emi, and everyone within a 2-block radius, to Yukio's arrival. Just as she could with Nanisher though, Emi knew how to spot the signs of Yukio's anxiety, thus his sudden habit of screaming for them at the very top of his lungs from only a few meters away. Even as Nanisher began to mutter bitterly about Yukio's ever-boisterous behavior, Emi couldn't help but giggle just a little at the familiar sight. It was helping, she realized. Now that her teammates were here she could feel her confidence, real confidence, rising. They were, after all, shinobi. They were fighters and strong ones at that. They had to be because Emi knew for a fact, if she and her wayward teammates could survive their clearly batshit insane immortal sensei, they could survive just about anything these leaf nin were set to throw at them. With a teacher like Hidan sensei, a few measly tests were the least of their concerns. Hello to you too, Yukio. How was your morning? Emmy asked of the taller boy once he came to a stop at the right of her, adjacent to Nanisher, who was still glaring sourly at the oblivious preteen. Alright I guess, Yukio shrugged with a wide grin on his face. I managed to find this cool sushi place near our hotel though. Maybe we can go after we pass these stupid exams, huh? Emmy didn't even have to think about it. Sure. She agreed easily, smiling now at Yukio's unrestrained exuberance. HN? Nanisher grunted in turn, though whether it was in agreement with the plan or not was still beyond Emmy. She really needed to brush up on her emo. Maybe she could ask Yukio for tips. Or was there some sort of dictionary or language guide she could look up? It was food for thought at Leah. Startled from her thoughts by the sudden shout, Emmy spun on the heels of her sandals to come face to face with Hidan sensei, who was on time. Oh dear merciful gods, something is going to go very, very wrong today. And then Hidan sensei will kill us all in cold blood. I just know it. What in the sage's good name are you three doing just standing around out here for? Hidan sensei demanded of them. It's about time for you to start the first exam. Hi Hidan sensei. Emmy tried stutter out, but her voice died before she could get anything else out. For the normally tardy jonin to be on time for anything, it had to be serious and deathly so. This Emmy knew without fail. When neither Nanisher nor Yukio tried to talk in the following silence either though, Emmy understood that they too were explicitly aware of this fact, and were subsequently just as startled by the knowledge of it. For Hidan to be here and on time to boot when, according to Yukage-sama, he'd been whole hours late for vital A and S rank missions before. Oh right. Hidan sensei sighed after another few moments of tense silence, seeming to take their lack of response as something else entirely. He always had been a bit obtuse about his own shortcomings after all, especially when it came to timely arrivals and a good excuse for failing so epically at them. I guess I should say something inspirational, or something. How about don't die? Yeah, we'll go with that. What Ash? You three brats go have fun and don't die. Hidan sensei smiled all too pleasantly at them, completely ignoring Yukio's attempt to speak. Which wasn't actually all that unusual. I'll see you after the exam. He grinned, and then just as suddenly as he'd appeared, the jonin was gone, wandering off again with a half-hearted wave from over his shoulder. It wasn't until the disguised jonin's towering form vanished from sight completely that Yukio spoke again. Did he really just say that? Yes. Emmy said with a tired sigh. Her head hung low as her earlier stress levels unsurprisingly rose to the forefront of her thoughts once again now that Hidan sensei had made his appearance. I guess we better Emmy never got to finish her reluctant sentiments, never got to give one last encouraging smile to the best, only, friends she'd ever had before they entered a foreign shinobi school to undertake the first milestone of many in their careers. And why? Because in the time it took to blink, Emmy and her teammates were surrounded on all sides by a half a dozen or so broad figures dressed almost entirely in black. Their sudden attackers bore no distinguishing features that Emmy could note in the infinitesimal time frame she was afforded to study them. Wearing plain white masks, they could have resembled wraiths if it weren't for the morning sun still pelting down on them all. Emmy had but another scant moment to tense, and then there was movement from her left, from Nanisher, no doubt. After that the tableau was broken and large callous hands, adult and male considering average size ratios, had risen into her field of vision, one clamped over her mouth like a band of fleshy iron while others, more than one pair, curled around her arms and shoulders, pinning her in place. Emmy had but one last instant to glance to her right, Yukio's muffled shouting indicating he too at least was receiving similar treatment, before a sharp tap at the side of her neck heralded the familiar darkness of imminent unconsciousness, which meant she and her team had in all likelihood just been kidnapped. Great. Just great. I was right. Hidan sensei's going to butcher us for this.